Welcome, everyone. In today's episode of the Northern Broadcast Service, I have our Minister of WA Affairs, Cretox, here with me today.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be here.
Glad to hear it. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. A bit tired, but I'm all right.
Well, we'll try to get through this pretty quickly then. All right, well, let's get started. I want to start right at the very beginning because you're actually relatively new to the North Pacific, but I know that a lot of people don't necessarily know your backstory. So, can you tell us why you were interested in nation states and about how far back you started to actually become involved?
So, I would say it's a pretty boring story regarding how I became interested in NS in general. My older brother was playing this game for quite some time through law school, and he introduced it to me in 2015. So, I created my first nation, that's Cretox State, my current main, in November 2015. Initially, I was playing the game for quite some time as answering issues, occasional R&B posting, etc. in the West Pacific, not really being involved in the government there or anything of that nature.
Did you actually get involved into other regions before you became involved here in the North Pacific, or did you sort of decide that you were looking to become more interested in the government side of things and that caused you to come to the North Pacific?
My interest in the government side of things was only really quite recent. I had my stint in TWP keeping to myself. After that, I sort of lost interest, CTE'd for a couple of years. I returned to the game in late 2018, early 2019 in Europe, and that was again issue answering RMB posting. I decided I wanted to give this game another shot, so May of this year I founded, checked out the North Pacific, and I decided this is something I would be interested in.
What has your experience been like here in the North Pacific so far? Did you make use of the regional handbook or form a mentorship relationship with anyone? Like, what resources did you use as you started to become more involved here?
Dispatches, whatever's on the forum. I wouldn't say I really had any mentors early on or recruitment. I simply saw the dispatch listing out what role the government has, so I created an account on the forum, applied for citizenship, and was mostly doing my own research in that regard as I was going along.
How soon after joining the North Pacific did you become interested in the executive ministries?
I actually don't recall off the top of my head. It was May 15th that I gained citizenship. I was posting on the RMB for a bit of time prior to that, but the executive ministries, I would say early June of this year.
That's really recently.
Oh, yes.
So for someone who's just that new to becoming interested in the government aspect of nation states, um, you've made quite a lot of progress in a really short amount of time. Um, what made you so interested in the World Assembly specifically?
So I have prior experience in the World's Assembly, mostly working. I passed a GA resolution at some point that was GA 400, which was repealed shortly thereafter. And it's at that point that I lost interest in the game for the first time, CTE'd, etc., etc. So I do have a bit of experience. The WA is something that has always interested me, but I was never really engaged with it at the level I am now.
Right, that makes sense. As people get more involved and invested, they spend more time on things, and you become much more experienced, and that helps with keeping things interesting. But I guess I want to ask, now that you do have that experience, um, what in your words makes the World Assembly so captivating?
I would say it's simply the breadth and the depth of perspectives that the World Assembly offers. In that being, kills me a little to say this, being good at GASC affairs, at passing proposals, at having discussions there, it's a really universal skill set no matter what region you're a part of. And I know when it comes to the SC especially, there is quite a bit of out of character, quite a bit of metagaming. However, I feel that the WA as a whole is something that really brings players of all regions together, and that level of experiencing other perspectives is something that has really captivated me with the WA.
Do you see the WAGA as analogous to real-world policy decisions, or is it more of a role-play thing for you?
I would say there's a bit of an element of both. Since the WA, yes, a lot of proposal ideas are based on real law. Quite a bit of discussion is, at least has its roots in real life contract law, real life territorial decisions. And, well, however, the WA can never truly be a representation of real life law, obviously. You have only so many characters per proposal, and it's not real life.
That's
So
absolutely true.
there is a crucial element of role.
I was just asking, like, because you mentioned being able to listen to different people's
Yes.
perspectives and how that might contribute to your interest in the WA. I was basically wondering, do you write proposals that align to your own real-world views and then debate them in the GA? Is that sort of what you're saying?
No, that's not really what I'm saying at all. Obviously, real life views do influence how you write proposals. People are more inclined to write what they are familiar with personally. However, the GA inherently is roleplay. You are roleplaying either a fictional ambassador or a fictional nation, and you are, in some capacity, roleplaying these interactions. Even for those players who intentionally post out of character in every forum on the WA subforum, you are still engaging in some level of roleplay.
So you're now the author of, is it 10 WA resolutions?
I'll actually check that right now.
I got that number from someone else, but I didn't verify it, so I figured I'd ask, because that's an incredible number. Does that sound like the right ballpark?
Yes, I just checked. Cretox State has 10 resolutions in total.
Which do you feel are the most significant? And by that I mean, like, either the most important to you or the most challenging to have written, and why?
I would say that the most challenging, interesting are the GA resolutions as a whole, simply because my experience in the Security Council is limited.
Are there
Out of
any,
the
like,
G-
specific WA/GA resolutions that stand out to you?
Yes. Out of the GA resolutions that I've written, I would say the arbitration ones, of which I've written 3 in total, I believe, were the most interesting and the most challenging for me to write, simply because I feel it's quite a fascinating niche of real world law that doesn't receive virtually any representation in the WA.
It's pretty cool. So,
Also because no one's planning to repeal those yet.
right. Well, maybe with more attention, people will start looking at them. So, under Tloms's administration, you were recently, deservedly, named Minister of WA Affairs. What have you found to be the most challenging aspect of the role so far?
That is an excellent question, and I have to say I don't have a clear answer to that. It's obviously quite a substantial jump from being a deputy minister of WA Affairs to being a minister of WA Affairs, because not only am I coordinating administrative stuff, I'm also coordinating various programs that the ministry is running. I'm coordinating deputies myself now, and I am acting on behalf of the delegate when it comes to managing the WA side of the region's affairs. So it's a huge jump in responsibility, but surprisingly, I never quite felt overwhelmed taking on this responsibility. Likely because I've had excellent people advising me, Twams, Ghost, all of them. This region in general has a huge amount of WA expertise, a huge amount of institutional memory when it comes to that area of the game. The senior WA consultants especially have been immensely helpful when it came to navigating being a minister.
That's fair. To what extent?
I've introduced
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I've introduced a number of new programs during my time as minister, and I've always had a feeling of insecurity when it came to WEFR's stuff such as Accelerator Program, stuff such as the card rewards that I'm rolling out for ministry participation. It feels as though I am changing quite a few things about how the ministry operates. There's always a nagging sense of insecurity when it comes to making these changes, especially for someone so relatively new to the region. But again, I would never say it felt truly overwhelming.
I'll get into each of the programs that you've introduced this term, but I do want to take an aside and just say that as a former minister myself, and one who also served when I was relatively new to the region, and who also made a number of changes in that ministry, that I think you can be confident that the changes that you're making are for the benefit of the region, and you should basically there is always going to be a certain sense of insecurity about the changes that you're making because you don't know how successful they're going to be or if they're going to catch on. But as long as you know that your heart is in the right place, and that you have sort of the belief in the program, that it will likely succeed. So don't be too hard on yourself, is what I would say.
I have to say that one of the major successes of the ministry this term has been the level of participation by staffers and simply the amount of people actively engaged in helping make this ministry run. I was told by people on several occasions that this is one of the most active times for the ministry, and this is one of the most active versions of this ministry that people have seen.
Oh, it most certainly is. What role do you think you've played in cultivating that activity?
Early on, I've been taking quite an aggressive stance towards recruiting for the ministry, both internally and people who I know personally in NS and who I believe would be interested in this. I feel that making that personal connection, personally recruiting TNPers who might be interested in WA affairs or just the WA in general is really huge when it comes to developing a solid base for any ministry.
When you're doing this sort of recruitment, what opportunities do newcomers have within the Ministry of World Assembly Affairs to actually participate? What sort of avenues can they take?
So I would say the major avenues here are from simple administrative tasks, opening and managing WA resolution voting threads for every proposal that's reaching queue or nearing queue, and which will likely end up at a vote, assisting with the writing of the ministry's information for WA voters or IFV publications, which even if you're a complete newcomer, even if you're not all too certain what makes a proposal good or not, or what makes a proposal solid. There are still plenty of opportunities to engage in discussion, to just work around, to see what goes into writing these publications, and eventually, of course, writing your own WA proposals, which, due to the amount of WA expertise, as I previously said, available to the ministry, is streamlined immensely compared to what you might get otherwise were you simply trying to do this on your own. There's also, of course, engaging in discussions on the forum, in voting on proposals, engaging in those threads. So a lot of expertise, a lot of opportunities to learn by osmosis as well, just listening, observing, and opportunities to exercise that expertise.
That makes sense. One of the things you did relatively early on, as you've already mentioned now once or twice, was to create a new spin on the sponsorship program in the World Assembly Accelerator program. I know it's fairly old news at this point, but for those who still aren't yet familiar, can you explain what the Accelerator program is and why it's an improvement over the old sponsorship program?
So the accelerator program is essentially a two-step process when it comes to assisting or corny accelerating the revision and passage of WA proposals. In the first step, people can post their, well, this program is, I should say, first off, targeted at drafts for proposals that are either complete or nearing a stage of completion, effectively those that would otherwise be ready to post on the NS on-site forum or have already been posted there. And the idea is that first people apply to phase one, which is the proposal is discussed internally within the ministry, and we directly assist that author with revising the proposal, making it into something that has a better chance of passing and is overall a more worthy addition to the WA's books. Most anyone can apply to the accelerator program. This is not limited to TM peers. It's open to both domestic authors and foreign authors, should they want the assistance and the feedback. After the author is confident that their proposal is in a ready state to be submitted, then ministry leadership along with the delegate discuss the proposal and determine if we want to sponsor it. Phase two sponsorship effectively means that TMP will vote for the proposal, TMP will likely approve the proposal, and TMP will provide assistance with campaigning, lobbying, should that assistance be necessary. One of the major differences between the accelerator and the old sponsorship program is that under the accelerator program, the phases of the program are clearly defined. What we bring to the table is laid out step by step, and I feel this is important to lower the barrier of entry, or the perceived barrier of entry, for people looking to submit their drafts. Additionally, this program is limited to, as I've said, completed or nearly completed drafts, meaning it's more clear what is expected from the person who is applying, and it's overall a more streamlined take on the old program. In general, I have to say it's been seeing quite a bit more success than the old sponsorship program, even this early in the program's lifetime. Under Accelerator, there have been, I believe, a total of 7 drafts submitted in the past month or so, with 3 of those passing and the rest still being drafted.
That's an incredible success record. I actually did not know that many had been submitted and that many had passed. Likewise, you introduced the World Assembly Mentorship Program more recently this term. Why do you think the mentorship program is important? And speaking pragmatically, how active do you expect it will be?
I think the last part is the easiest to answer, so I guess I'll start with that. And just speaking realistically, I'm not certain how active mentorship will be. What I hope is, since the program is focused on internal TNP authors who have ideas but aren't too certain how to mechanically write a proposal, how to conduct research, how to put pen to paper and get their idea into something that can be put on the on-site forum and hopefully eventually passed as a resolution. So with the accelerator program, I wasn't too certain going into it how active it would be. I actually had concerns that it would sort of lose activity and begin to falter, similar to how the sponsorship program began to falter after some time. Fortunately, thus far, accelerator seems to be enjoying substantial success. I can't say how much activity mentorship will get, but I hope that it will see interest comparable to the accelerator program. With the mentorship program, my overarching idea was to sort of codify assistance provided to internal aspiring authors who would like help getting their proposal actually written and who are too inexperienced or who are simply uncertain how they would translate their idea into something actionable. I would say that neither the accelerator program nor the mentorship program are really introducing new resources. They're simply streamlining, providing an effective pipeline for the utilization of existing resources. This was a major theme I wanted to embrace going into this term as Minister of WA Affairs, that the ministry has an exceptional quantity of resources, experience, talent, and activity. So it makes sense to introduce processes and programs that would effectively utilize that activity.
Another initiative you recently introduced is the World Assembly Affairs Survey. The survey seeks public opinion on the quality of writing in WA IFVs and whether the public appreciates WA Affairs notification telegrams. Without naming any individual responses, can you give us an overview of what the data as a whole is telling us so far?
Oh, absolutely. Just to provide some context before I start with the data, TMP released a similar survey back in 2019 regarding IFV releases and overall confidence in the ministry's operations. This 2020 survey is a modified version of that with several new questions attached. Overall, without going into specifics, I would say that confidence in the ministry is quite remarkably high. Confidence in the quality of IFV writing, both for GA and SC proposals, confidence in how we're doing, in whether what we're doing is informative. All of that, I would say, the data is quite pleasant to see. What is somewhat lacking is self-reported participation in ministry activities such as forum voting and related business. And participation in, which is a new question on the survey this year, the World Assembly Development Program, or WADP, proposal voting awards, with, if I recall correctly, the majority of respondents knowing of this program but not choosing to actively participate in it, with only a small minority actively seeking these voting rewards. To define what exactly this WADP voting awards is, it's simply consistent voting on proposals gets you card rewards as part of the larger umbrella of WADP card rewards for WA participation. So to summarize, confidence in the ministry, good. Level of participation in ministry business, decent, could be improved.
How do people feel about the telegrams?
I will actually pull that up right now.
And secondly, do you plan on publicly releasing the data for it to be reviewed by the Regional Assembly?
Oh, certainly. We plan to publicly release the data similarly to how the data was publicly released in the 2019 survey. So looking at the data for telegrams, approximately 70, of course, this is subject to change as more people respond to the survey in the coming days. However, for now, approximately 75% of those responding are interested in continuing to receive these telegrams. What's interesting is the question regarding to what degree these telegrams and IFVs in general influence people's voting on proposals. The vast majority do take IFVs into consideration in some capacity. For SC proposals, for example, approximately 30% always say they always vote as these telegrams recommend. Another approximately 28-30% usually vote, and the majority of the remainder take these into consideration. So overall, I would say that at least out of the sample responding, people are reading our telegrams, people are taking them into account. However, there are always going to be other factors at play that could potentially influence people's votes. In fact, that was a new question added to the survey in 2020. What other factors influence how you vote on GA or SC proposals? With those factors being predictably out of character knowledge, in character knowledge, what people think of the nominee, especially for SC proposals, real life views in some capacity. So I would say that our efforts are being utilized to a significant degree. However, there is always going to be some flexibility in people's voting choices beyond that and how they choose to inform themselves.
How has the survey been advertised? Mike, I guess what I'm trying to get at is how do you know that the sample of people who have responded to the survey are not strictly limited to TNP's government, who would be naturally more inclined to be supportive of the Ministry of WA Affairs?
Oh, yes, I see what you're saying there. This survey, I'm not certain about last year's one, but this survey was specifically targeted at TNP WAs, since, of course, if you're a non-WA, the WA ministry and all of these proposals likely mean little to nothing to you. I advertised this by pinging in the executive server, pinging WA residents in TNP Discord, and sending out a region-wide telegram to all WA nations, as well as advertising it on the World Factbook entry for the region. So I would believe that the sample size is fairly representative. It's simply a matter of people getting online and filling out the survey.
Understood. So we're just now slightly over halfway through this term. You've already introduced some fairly substantial programs and initiatives. What are your plans as minister for the second half of this term?
Much of the work I've done in the first half of the term has been recruitment, has been and has had a focus on the outward appearance of how we're conducting operations with the accelerator program, the mentorship program, the new card rewards for ministry participation, which I don't believe I've brought up already, but essentially, well, I might have brought it up, essentially for participating in ministry voting threads, for holding voting threads, writing IFBs, etc. Staffers can expect to receive cards on a recurring monthly basis, similar to what the Ministry of Home Affairs is currently running. So this has been about laying the foundation going into the second half of the term. For the second half of the term, I aim to focus on internal improvement to how the ministry is operating, since we have such an excellent foundation going into this next month and a half. I've already done some capacity of that, starting with when I was a WA deputy at the tail end of last term. I updated and modified the format that we're using for our proposal voting threads on the forum. I seek to build on that by focusing on streamlining efforts to help newer staffers and old staffers who lack experience in the WA in general with offering their first proposals. And we're seeing some of that with staffers such as Boston Castle, with longtime members such as Praetor posting their first GA or first WA drafts in general on the forum, and I'm excited to see where that goes in the future, with other newer members of the ministry beginning to work on hopefully passing their own proposals. It's really quite exciting to see.
It's actually getting me interested as well, so you've got that going for you.
There's also, I would also like to focus, I also intend to focus on internal procedures with regards to the training of new deputies and the training of new staffers, since at the moment there exists no real centralized document or similar that new staffers can easily access when it comes to how the ministry functions. There are guides on our forum, but those are spread out a bit. And in general, I would like to see it become easier, become more accessible, and become more engaging as a whole to be a staffer in this ministry. I think that one of the great things that the Ministry of Home Affairs has rolled out recently, well, I say recently, it's been a few months now, but the Home Affairs Handbook, as they call it, which goes over everything you would need to know to become an active, productive member of the Ministry of Home Affairs.
Well, that actually already answers one of the questions that I had for you later, which was basically going to be that as minister, you're going to leave gigantic shoes for whoever comes after you, or whenever that might be. And I was going to ask specifically how you ensure that the next minister is well prepared to serve, and what you're going to do to sort of groom deputies for that role.
In general, the WA deputy team this term has been exceptional, with Robespierre, who is a long time, it seems like it's been a long time, but he's actually only been here since last May, since May 2019. But members such as Robespierre, Fredersen, who is another long-time staffer and deputy, and two new deputies this term, Pope St. Peter, who is an active member of the World Assembly, and Westenor, who is an active issues player who has only recently become involved but is already posting voting thread after voting thread, actively contributing with IFVs. We have quite a few rising stars in the ministry. We have a lot of old talent. I think that whoever ends up being minister after I leave the position will be quite well equipped to take over operations without really leaving anything to rot, especially if my efforts to streamline internal training and internal processes are successful in the latter half of this term. I really think there should not be any problem continuing with the way things are running.
That's good to hear. So, while I have made this interview primarily focused on your role within the North Pacific, and I will continue to do so after this question, I think now is also a good time to mention that you are a WA staffer in several other regions, including the South Pacific and the East Pacific. Do you see these roles as a conflict of interest in any way to the important work you do here? And what benefits do you see from being actively invested in other large regions?
Oh, yes, the Cosmo question. So, to answer the first part of that, no, I don't see these responsibilities in upper regions as anything of a conflict of interest. My loyalty is always to the North Pacific first and foremost. That's why Tuam's appointed me to be a Minister of WA Affairs in the North Pacific. I would actually say that my involvement in upper regions and upper regions WA ministries especially has been a significant asset when it comes to not only developing my own views of how to run the ministry, since I am, of course, relatively new to the North Pacific as a whole, but also in informing what we're doing well, what could be improved, and how offers sometimes more experience, sometimes less so, leaders of upper regions WA ministries are handling their internal affairs and their internal operations.
That's one of the biggest benefits of foreign affairs in general, is that you get to learn those lessons and apply them at home.
Absolutely.
So I saw you also recently applied to become a member of the Security Council. And while I am aware of internal discussions, I suppose I should ask a few questions on behalf of the public. Can you explain why you're interested in becoming a member?
Certainly. So I believe that the work that I'm doing in the North Pacific and my history, however relatively brief in the North Pacific, has made me a good fit to be on the Security Council. My level of community involvement, the general trust that the community has in me, which I'm very thankful for. They've all been an amazing help in getting accustomed to this region and accustomed to being a significant part of its government, along with my experience handling sensitive information as a minister, as an election commissioner, which is another one of my roles in the North Pacific, as a former deputy speaker, former deputy minister of foreign affairs. I'm involved, visible, and active presence, and I generally feel that these are qualities that should be looked for in any potential applicant to the Security Council.
Would you be disappointed if the Security Council rejected your nomination? What I mean by that is, of course, you'd be disappointed, but um, how would that affect your future performance in the region?
I wouldn't allow it to affect my future performance in the region in any way. I applied because I thought that I would be an active, visible, contributing member of the council, and that I have the ability to be a substantial contributor to that facet of the region's security. However, if I am rejected, ultimately, I'm not going to allow that to slow me down in the future. I won't allow that to make me burned out or depressed. Ultimately, it is the Security Council's decision, and I will respect whatever decision those who are charged with our region's security end up making.
Can you give us your take on efforts to make the Security Council more transparent?
I have to say, I'm hugely impressed, and I'm a huge fan of the tremendous effort that Dredton, our current vice delegate, is undertaking along with the Security Council in terms of disclosure of old records, threads, channels. Access to information is, well, access to information that is not potentially compromising is essential to public faith in the Security Council. It's a core facet of transparency, of trust, and of making the Security Council appear as an accountable body that has the region's best interests at heart. I
which
would
it
say
is.
that I would say that oh yes, which it is, of course, no doubt about that. Along with the weekly, I still get reports, and I believe Dretton wanted to roll out a security counselor highlights initiative or something of that nature, which will also certainly go a long way towards making the Security Council seem as if it's an active, integrated part of our region's day to day affairs.
Do you have any future plans or ambitions for elected office?
I have considered and I've contemplated a potential run as a delegate at some point in the future. And I've started reaching out for advice, developing the beginnings of a potential platform. However, any potential run is not in the close future. It's not as though I'm declaring tomorrow, after all. So I still have some time for that, and I would definitely like to see where that takes me.
Absolutely. We'll all be rooting for you. You've made a tremendous amount of progress in the North Pacific in an incredibly short time. What advice would you give to others just starting out in the region?
I would say to aggressively pursue any opportunities that you might have for learning, for becoming a better NS player in general, for becoming a better member of the region and whatever field you choose to pursue in NS. When I was new to the game, and later on when I was new to the North Pacific, I made use of any resource I could get my hands on the forums, any dispatches, simply talking to more experienced people to inform and shape what kind of a player I am now. I would say to new players in NS and in TNP specifically, don't be shy and pursue whatever information is out there, whatever you can do to improve yourself. In general, people are very supportive, and of course, the worst they can do is say no.
Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this interview up?
Other than a big thank you to everyone who's helped me get this far and to you for having me here for this interview, I don't think so.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for your time then, Cretox. And to our audience, thank you for listening to this episode of NBS. Have a nice day.